Hello and welcome to the Psalms podcast, the podcast in which we talk about the Psalms. My name is Will Gray and this is my friend Michael Brown.
Hello.
And today we are going to be journeying into Psalm 3 and all that it means for them and for us. And so before we do, and I start to read the verses, Michael is just going to give us a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so as you said, we're looking at Psalm 3, which is the first of the Lament Psalms in the Bible. Lament is it's a psalm that expresses a state of distress. So it could be sadness, but could also be like sort of an anguish or pain or even anger. And the lament is directed towards God as a request for rescue or salvation. In this case, it is written by David at a time when he is on the run from his son Absalom. It's just a story you can find in the book of Samuel. Whilst it's written from a state of distress, a time of trouble, it also simultaneously expresses a confidence that God is still with the writer and will provide rescue. And that's something that you see throughout the laments of the Psalms, and it's shown really clearly in this one.
A Psalm of David, when he fled from Absalom his son. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people.
So the first thing I think to talk about here is the superscript, or the title, the attribution. So this is the first really substantial one that we've had with the Psalms. I know with the other ones we had a Psalm of David, but this is the first one that provides a historical context. So there's a lot of back and forth in scholarly circles as to whether these were originally part of the Psalm, whether they were added later. The main answer is that we don't really know, and we probably won't ever know unless someone miraculously digs up the original Psalm documents. There's no way you're going to know that. Right. And so it's one of those things with biblical scholarship where you just have to go. I'm inclined to think that this particular one was added later.
Okay.
And that's just because it would seem to make the most sense to me. I think it would seem weird to me that if he's writing this poem whilst on the run from his son, that he would write about himself in the third person and the past tense.
Yeah, I thought that'd be weird if I'd written a poem about my life and then said, this is a poem about Will, who was fleeing from his son.
Yeah, it'd be weird. You would write about yourself in the first person, wouldn't you?
Yes. That makes sense.
It'd be strange. And so, yeah, it certainly makes most sense to me. And this is the consensus of lots of scholars as well. This is probably a note added, and most of them probably are added by the person that compiles the book. So It's like a little comment that goes with each psalm to help the reader to know, this is one of David and it was written about here and there. So let's talk about that context because it's really important to understand the meaning of the psalm. So, Will, I was wondering what do you remember about the story of Absalom and David?
I don't remember much. I remember that they're father and son, but we've already talked about that, so that kind of takes away a bit of what I remembered.
Yeah.
I think it's something to do with David's daughter as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
remembering
some
that?
really messy family stuff.
Family, yeah.
So what you find with David's life is it's kind of split into three parts. So you get the early part where there's the famous stories, obviously, of the slaying of Goliath, and then when he's on the run from Saul. So he gets anointed king secretly by Samuel while Saul is still king, and he goes on the run for a long time. And then eventually Saul gets killed, David becomes king, and then you get this big glorious period where everything's going great.
Yes.
And it's kind of this golden period for Israel. And then you get this period towards the end of his life that starts with his sins with Bathsheba, where he steals another man's wife and has that man killed to cover it up. And basically from then on, everything starts to slightly fall apart.
Okay.
And it's all through things going wrong with his family. So it's kind of this image of that sin leads to loads of troubles, loads of consequences down the line from then on. This particular incident happens because one of his sons basically rapes his own sister, tricks his own sister to come into his room and rapes her. Probably half sister, although the text doesn't specify that, because David has multiple wives.
Okay.
And Absalom is the brother of the sister. And so he eventually, after a bit, murders the other brother that had done the raping.
Right.
And has to go on the run because of that. Eventually, David brings him back and forgives him, but still keeps him kind of at arm's distance. And eventually this leads to Absalom rebelling against his father. And loads of people in the kingdom take Absalom's side. David is forced to flee from Jerusalem and go on the run. It's basically a civil war happens between the two.
Yeah.
And this is the situation that we find David in here.
I mean, that feels really messy, doesn't it?
It's incredible. It's so...
there's so much, it's not black and white, is it? There's so much good and bad on each side.
So if you ever read the books of Samuel, which I highly recommend, I obviously recommend you read all parts of the Bible, but it's a very entertaining story. It's very Game of Thrones.
Yeah, yes.
I was reading 1 and 2 Samuel and really thinking, wow, this would make a great TV series. This would be so kind of Game of Thrones like.
I remember someone saying that and I don't even think they were Christian. I think I saw them on TV, and it was a historian or professor, and they were saying, if anyone ever tells you, the Bible is boring, get them to read.
No, I mean,
these books, these 1 Samuel 2, it's just madness. Like some of the drama that goes on.
Courtiers and plots and backstabbing and murder and really interesting stuff. And this psalm is written in the midst of that, when David is on the run, when he's lost, basically. He's, at this point, eventually he defeats Absalom and regains Jerusalem and rules until the end of his life. But at the point where this is written, he doesn't know that that's going to happen. So it seems like everything is lost at this point, and that's where we pick up the psalm.
So is there anything else we need to know about this psalm before we go verse by verse?
You have lots of parallels here with his earlier part of his life. That's why I talked about there being this 3-stage part, because he's wandering at the beginning and a fugitive, and then he's king, and then he's a fugitive again. And biblical literature loves that kind of clever story structure and parallels. And that's very much why I think Psalm 2 and Psalm 3 are next to each other. They're the two kind of sides of this coin, of the same coin in David's life. And this is very key for understanding this idea of Messianic literature that we talked about before. That certain psalms are held up as kind of prefiguring the Messiah, which obviously we as Christians believe is Jesus.
Yes.
But was a figure that was predicted throughout the Old Testament and through who the Jewish people were always waiting for. And the reason why it's an interesting lesson in Messianic literature is because the figure of the Messiah is very much modeled on David. So there's the glorious Messianic king, which we read about in Psalm 2. But there's also this figure of the suffering servant who is being persecuted and chased and rejected by his people.
Okay, so that's Psalm 2 and 3. So Psalm 2 is like glorious king, he's ruling, he's reigning, and it's wonderful, and that's a messianic picture.
Yeah.
And then we've got Psalm 3, which we're looking at today, which is suffering servant
which
style.
is also a messianic psalm, but it wouldn't necessarily be that obvious when you look at it.
Right.
Psalm 2, I think, is very obviously a messianic psalm. You look at it, it's about the king that's going to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Like, you know, that's very easy to see the glorious Messiah in that.
Yes.
Psalm 3 is much less obviously messianic at first glance.
I was going to say, because I've never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
Even when reading it, I don't think about it as a messianic psalm when I read it earlier.
Yeah, but the reason we know that Psalm 3 is a messianic psalm is because the Jews always read it as a messianic psalm. So all throughout Second Temple period Jewish writers, that's the Jewish writers between the two testaments, and there was so much literature that there was a real sort of golden era of Jewish religious literature.
So they're writing
tons
after the last book of the Old Testament.
Yeah,
before
the New Testament. Talking about the Old Testament and looking ahead to the Messiah, they always held up Psalm 3 as a messianic psalm. And this is why you see, like in Isaiah, for instance, you know, Isaiah prophesies the Messiah. He prophesies him as both the anointed king and the suffering servant. And the reason he does that is because David was both of those things.
Right.
And David is held up as a picture of the coming Messiah. He's going to be of the house of David. He's going to be like David.
Okay, so obviously Isaiah comes after David.
Yeah.
And his prophecies are based on David's life.
Yeah.
As someone who's both king and suffering servant. So that's where you get all that imagery in Isaiah from, because it's messianic, pointing forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the Messiah is going to be a better David. It's going to be like everything David was, but more. And better.
So he looks back and he points forward.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And so he takes those two ideas, and what's fascinating in Isaiah is you see those two ideas start to meld together as well. So you get the Messianic king, but his glorification comes through his suffering in Isaiah, which obviously you see massively through the story of Jesus. This moment that seems to be complete defeat brings complete victory. And that really answers the messianic prophecies of Isaiah. Yeah, so it's because we see both of those figures in David's story. And that's almost certainly why Psalm 2 and 3 are next to each other. I think there's something else worth noting that's in this psalm that we haven't talked about yet, which is, of course, the Selah.
Yes, Selah. I wasn't sure whether I was meant to read them when I read the psalm.
Yeah, well...
Was I meant to say Selah?
People take different approaches to that. And there's a good reason why people take different approaches, and that's because no one's entirely sure what it means.
Great. I'm getting a common theme here.
So Selah is a term that occurs 71 times in the Psalms. It only appears in one other place in the Bible. Do you know where that is?
No. Genesis.
It's in Haggai, in Minor Prophet.
Okay.
And only once.
Got that wrong.
So
I'm not doing well today on my questions.
So it's quite an obscure term.
Yeah.
You know, there's not many terms in the Bible that will only appear in one book or in one or two books.
Haven't they got a specific name? I feel like they do.
Yeah. You've put me on the spot there.
Sorry.
This is why it's not usually translated. Like, you'll notice it's left in Hebrew, which most words are not in the Bible. So the New Living Translation translates it as interlude, but that's more of an educated guess than a proper translation. There's a bunch of different suggestions. First one is that it just indicates a pause in the text. So Selah could be a synonym of Hebrew words that mean forever. So it's almost like an amen kind of thing. It's almost like a this is true forever kind of statement.
Yes.
Selah could be derivative of the Hebrew root salal. So notice that the S and the L, when they wrote Hebrew words, there were no vowels.
Okay.
So the key things are the consonants.
Okay.
So the S and the L, salal, selah, it's most of the same letters. So salal means to raise voices in praise and or make the instruments louder.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So it could be a musical instruction.
Yeah.
We don't really know. I think the idea of it being a pause for meditation and reflection carries a lot of merit, and that's quite a popular interpretation. That seems to fit with where it's placed. It usually comes at the end of a movement within the psalm. Like if there's parts where it changes theme or changes idea, that's often where the Selahs come. And so it seems to be like, we've talked about this, now think about that. And now we move on to a new idea. So that would be my guess. And that's what seems to make sense, certainly with Psalm 3.
Okay. Is that a little bit like, almost just thinking back to Psalm 1, the meditation on the law of the Lord? It's like a practical application of that. Hey, here's some words. We're going to meditate on that.
Yeah, think about it.
Think about it. Here's some more words. Think about it.
Yeah, definitely. Because obviously these were used in worship and were almost certainly set to music in some of the Psalms. You could imagine the Selah as being like a musical break where you're supposed to think about what you've just heard or said, and then you move on to the next.
That's what I've always thought about it in my head.
Yeah.
Thinking about it.
But we can't say for certain.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about the context, some of the things we need to know about the story. So let's start going verse by verse.
Yeah. So starting from the beginning, O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. So here we find the psalmist, who we're obviously told is David, crying out to God in his trouble. Let's talk a bit about verse 2, because here we have a really interesting phrase, many are saying of my soul. What do you make of that? Many are saying of my soul. It's a slightly odd thing to say. We wouldn't say it's saying of my soul.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I guess so we're saying that he's running away, he's in fleeing mode, right? And he has enemies. And so I kind of, in my head, I'm thinking many of his enemies are saying that he's unrighteous, that he's cast off, or, he's not in God's good books. There's no salvation. Like, God's not going to listen to him. He's in the wrong kind of thing. That's in my head. That's where I'd go.
Yeah. So I think that's certainly part of it. I think the reason I find it odd is I think, now we would say we would just say they're saying of me, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And it would seem odd to us now to say, they're saying of my soul, specifically of my soul. And I think this gives us a good opportunity to talk about, is one of those examples where our English word for something has a slightly different connotation to what the Hebrew equivalent that's been translated might have. So the modern conception of the soul, I'd say, it's a slightly hazy concept of kind of a disembodied part of ourselves, the eternal part that lives on after our physical deaths. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Yeah. That idea really owes more to Greek philosophy than to the Bible. Because we live in the West, and the West is very much influenced by Greek philosophy, loads of that has kind of seeped into Christian thought. And one of those ways is this idea of the soul and what the soul is, because the Hebrew word that is here translated as soul, and that is almost always translated as soul in the English Bible, is the word nephesh. And it's used quite a lot, in quite a lot of slightly different ways in the Bible. So it can have lots of different meanings. But the gist of all of those meanings is that your nephesh is the core of who you are, your personhood, your life, all of you. And it's the sum of who you are, which includes, of course, your physicality, your body. So the biggest difference is that the Hebrew idea of nephesh is not a disembodied, like, invisible, eternal part of you.
Right.
It's all of you. It's who you are.
Your wholeness.
Yeah.
Everything about you.
And including your body, your physicality, your created
spirit
self.
and body.
Yeah. It actually, in its simplest form, means throat, interestingly.
Wow.
Yeah. I bet that was a surprise.
That was a surprise.
Yeah. Why do you think they've used the word throat? So I think it's an interesting kind of example of how different parts of society, because some cultures over time have used kind of the guts as being
Yes.
like the core part of you. We nowadays might talk about our heart.
Yes. I thought it was the guts in like Hebrew.
I think in Greek. I think once you get to the New
Greek.
Testament.
Yes. Okay. Fine. Yeah. I'm getting
You're
my
getting to the
testaments
guts.
mixed up.
Nefesh in its simplest form means throat. Why do you think the word for throat was then associated with soul?
Is that because, like, I guess if you speak from the throat, that's where your voice...
Definitely part of that. I think, if you think about the throat, you speak through it, you breathe through it, you eat through it, you drink through it. I think it's this idea that the throat is central to everything that you do as a person.
Right.
I think so much of what is required for life goes through your throat.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So nefesh. So when they're saying to say of my soul, he means that they're saying it of him, of the totality of who he is.
Yes.
That there's no salvation for him in God. Which of course is a big thing to say of David because of who he is. He is God's anointed king, which is a very sacred and special role in Israelite society. He is God's appointed servant on the earth. He's the one through whom God is supposed to bring about his rule and reign. And so to say that God has abandoned him is to say he's like removed his anointing from him.
And it's interestingly, like, because I think that from my perspective, having, reading the Bible retrospectively, so that's something that they as Jewish people would have believed about the king.
Yeah, the act of anointing is a very big deal. Being anointed with oil. It's not something that happened to loads of people. The high priest and the king.
Okay.
That's it. Not even prophets. I think there's only one prophet that gets anointed in the Bible. So the idea of being anointed is a big deal. You're God's servant on the earth. And that comes obviously with a great deal of reverence and status. So to say that he's been completely rejected by God is the worst kind of thing they can say about David.
Yeah.
That he's lost that blessing. But David has an answer ready in verse 3. So let's look at verse 3. You, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. So David is in no doubt as to whether God is still on his side or not. So here you get this lovely juxtaposition that you get in the Laments, in that in the first couple of verses, he seems completely lost. And it sounds like he's saying to God, like that God's abandoned him. That's what we might perceive. But it often then comes with this confidence that comes, but I know that you're still with me. I know that you're going to rescue me. And that's very much David's position here. He's in absolutely no doubt. He may have seemingly lost everything, but he knows that he still actually has everything that really counts. I really want to look at the second half of verse 3, because I think that's really significant. My glory and the lifter of my head. What do you think my glory means, to say that God is my glory?
I don't know. I mean, immediate thoughts would be like, I mean, this is probably way off the mark, but like, I feel like a crown, like he crowns his head kind of thing. The glory, like splendor, like beauty. You are the thing that I uphold. But I think that's probably way off.
I don't think it's way off. I ask because glory, I think, is another one of those words that we use a lot in church.
Yeah.
Because it comes up a lot in scripture.
Yeah.
But then actually, if you stop and think about it for a moment, you might be a little bit hazy about what it actually means. So the Hebrew word that's translated as glory is the word kavod. And this word kavod basically means heavy or weightiness.
Yes.
Yeah, the heaviness.
I remember that.
Which probably seems odd at first. But we're not, of course, talking about physical weight. The closest I can think about would be if we talk about someone's opinion. If it's someone that is well respected and has expertise, you might use that phrase that their opinion carries a lot of weight. You're saying that because someone of reputation and expertise is saying it, that opinion has a lot of significance. That's what kavod means. It's the weight of your reputation, your significance as a person. That's what glory is. And it's a lot to do with the fact that this is an honor-shame society.
Right.
Your actions bring you either honor or they bring you shame, and that very much defines your rank in society, your status in society. Mm-hmm. So your glory is the weight that you carry within your society. Looking at David, by any earthly measure, he has lost all of his honor.
Yes.
You know? His own son has risen up against him because of all this awful scandal that's happened in his family. Loads of his country has gone over to his son's side in his own open rebellion against him. He's had to flee his own capital. Objectively, he has no kavod. He's got no glory at this point. But David says, no, I have glory, and it's God. Yahweh is my glory. So essentially, by saying you are my glory, he's saying you are what makes me matter.
Yes.
You are what makes me significant.
Yeah.
You are the thing that defines my worth and my status, which then makes sense of the next phrase. Yeah. We talked about how in the Psalms you get those repetitions, those kind of rephrases of the same idea. Well, this is one of those where the lifting of the head comes in. So you are my glory, you lift my head is repeating the same idea in slightly different words. Because, when you're ashamed, when you've got no glory, when you've got no significance or pride or respect in society, your head is down,
Yeah.
So this idea of God lifting his head is that, okay, you give me significance, you give me glory, even though I've lost all of my earthly glory, earthly significance. Yeah. God lifts up his head because in Yahweh, he has ultimate honor and worth. Wow. It's great. I absolutely love that bit. Yeah. I really do.
That's awesome. So just in my head, it reminds me, it's like big identity things, right?
Yeah.
It's like in the beginning, the verses before, it's saying, the world is saying to David that you mean nothing. Your identity is wrapped up in whether you're sitting right now on the throne, and we think now that God, doesn't love you, doesn't care for you, hasn't anointed you anymore.
And any kind of objective observer would think that, based on what's happened.
Yes. Then David says, no, my identity is what God says about me, and who God is calling me to be, and that's what I'm going to cling on to, is the fact that God lifts up my head. And that's such a relevant thing, isn't it, for us? Like we can hold on to that and be like,
much.
No matter what the world calls me, because of my beliefs, because of who I am, what is the most true thing about reality is God being my glory, God being my definer, my identity.
Yeah, definitely. In verse 4, we have this mention of God's holy hill. This is almost certainly referring to the heavenly mountain. So what do I mean by that? So in many of the visions of God and of heaven and the kind of the heavenly court in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, Yahweh is depicted as dwelling on top of a mountain. And this is a very culturally common motif that's repeated through a lot of the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia. You find it in all the other kind of religions. I mean, most famously, of course, the Greeks have Mount Olympus. That's where the gods live.
Yes.
Mountaintops were considered to be the dwelling places of the gods, or sometimes literally, sometimes metaphorically. If you think about it, they were these out of reach, visually awe-inspiring places. It's not like today where we've been up to the top of every mountain.
Yes.
No one would have been up to the top of the very highest mountains. You couldn't, they didn't have the technology. It's not like they had oxygen tanks and things. So they were this impossible place to get to. They were often covered in clouds, which was another common motif, that where clouds were, you think of the cloud of glory, that's where God was. And that's why so many of the encounters with God throughout the Bible happen on mountains. The biblical writers loved to take common themes and motifs that were common in the religions around them and subvert them and change them. So, for instance, characters in the Bible are always going up to these places and meeting God in these places, which were supposed to be out of reach.
Okay. So it's like you guys will say God's up here in the mountains, and what's true about God is that we can go up into the mountains. And
he wants us to go up and
commune
meet
with him
and see him.
See him.
So think about Moses on Sinai, for instance, or Elijah meeting God on Mount Carmel, right up to the Transfiguration in the Gospels. They go up to a mountain.
Yes.
And Jesus is transformed. And actually, thinking about it, meets Moses and Elijah up there, who are the people that met God on a mountain. There's so many different layers that are in these stories. So here it is, God's holy, heavenly mountain. So it's probably not referring to a specific mountain. Often the one that they would be referring to is Mount Zion, but of course, David had to flee Mount Zion. It's currently in the hands of his enemies. So I think he's probably not referring to Jerusalem and Mount Zion here. He's probably referring to the heavenly mountain where God dwells, where his court is, which isn't a specific place. It's not like Mount Olympus, which was a real mountain. It's the idea of that's where God dwells in heaven. And that's where he's answering David from when he calls.
So what does this psalm mean for us Christians today?
Well, firstly, it is, of course, as we mentioned, a Messianic psalm. So we should look at Jesus first. It's always a good principle.
Always good.
Yeah. I think we see the cross here so strongly. Jesus was rejected by his own people in much the way that David has been persecuted. And particularly the cross, it just brings me to mind that verse about God being our glory, because the cross was just the most shameful way to die. It wasn't just that he was killed. It was that he was killed in a way that would strip him of all earthly glory, especially in an honor-shame society, to be executed as a criminal so publicly. You were stripped naked, you were beaten. It was gruesome, it was long. There's absolutely no kavod for Jesus in that, it would seem. And yet Jesus throughout knows that his Father is the source of his glory, his honor. And ultimately, of course, it's through that seemingly shame-filled, honor-less moment that God ultimately glorifies Christ to the ultimate position of glory and honor. Jesus is on the throne of heaven because of the cross. And wow, how much does it help us to remember that God is our glory?
Yes.
It's so easy for us to put our self-esteem in our social status, in our work status, our family status, our achievements. And what happens when we do that is that when we get knocked, it will come crumbling down so easily, because it's a house made of sand. It's not a firm foundation. If we remember that God is our glory, that's true no matter what position we're in.
Yes.
It makes me think of Paul saying, I'm content in all circumstances.
Yeah.
No, Paul has understood that idea that God is our glory, that our worth comes from who we are in God, not any of our earthly circumstances. And so you can then be in any earthly circumstance and still have confidence. Like David is here, like Paul was in prison, like Jesus was on the cross. Because if you can hold on to that and live out that, it just gives you strength to face so many things. It's important for us to remember that God is our glory. He gives us our worth. He is what makes us matter at the end of the day. And that then gives us confidence to sleep peacefully and wake confidently like David. So there's a message here about anxiety, I think.
Yes.
Cause to question that verse from the Gospels, why worry about tomorrow? Tomorrow take care of itself. You can have that attitude if you have the confidence that David shows here.
Yes.
That he knows that God will sustain his life.
Yes.
So I can go to sleep and have peace. and not be up all night worrying about this, worrying about that, worrying about that. It's so much easier said than done, isn't it?
I was going to say, and what are the tips to
So
do
much
that?
easier said than done. Well, the tips to doing that is to remind yourself a lot. And you do that by, how did we start in Psalm 1? Meditating on the Lord. See, all these Psalms, they all fall back on each other. How do you live the good life? Well, you can't live the good life if you're anxious all the time, if you're worrying all the time. How do you get that peace? Well, it's by meditating on the fact that God is our glory and that God is going to protect you. And you only do that by constantly reminding yourself, saying scripture over and over and over again to yourself.
Yes.
And by doing that, taking it into yourself, into your being, and it just being kind of written on your heart.
Yes.
On your nefesh.
Your nefesh. So very practically, that's like, find, if you're struggling to sleep at night because of you're worried about things, like finding scripture which speaks into that either lie that you're believing like, you could feel like you're in David's situation and the world is telling you, whatever, and you're like, okay, this is what the world's saying, what does God say? And then meditate on that and just speak it over yourself continually to realign your vision with God's vision of your life.
Yeah. Which is some like, so in the Orthodox tradition, they're supposed to say different parts of the Bible at different times of the day and different days.
Okay.
And this particular psalm is one that they're encouraged to recite first thing in the morning.
Oh, cool.
So you're supposed to say Psalm 3 first thing in the morning so that they start each day acknowledging that God has sustained them while they slept and that God will be with them and be their glory in the day ahead. Which I think is really cool. It's definitely something to try.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to this Psalms podcast. If you'd like to stay up to date with our release schedule, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook by searching for The Psalms Podcast. See you next time.